Everyone laughed when the broken veteran bought that cursed mountain ranch, until his dog uncovered something buried that powerful men would kill to keep hidden. Caleb Turner had already lost everything: his marriage, his home, and the peace he thought he brought back from war. With nothing left but his loyal German shepherd, he made one last reckless decision: buying a forgotten ranch no one dared to touch. But the silence of that land wasn't empty. It was hiding something. And the moment his dog started digging, Caleb realized this wasn't just a new beginning. It was a doorway into a past that was never meant to be found. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now? They said it was the worst decision a man like him could make. Some said it quietly, shaking their heads over coffee in a roadside diner. Others said it out loud, right to his face, like they couldn't help themselves. "Man like you shouldn't be up there alone," the clerk told him when he signed the papers. "That land eats people." Caleb Turner didn't argue. He just signed his name. His hand didn't shake even though it used to. That was the strange thing about coming back from war. People thought the shaking never stopped. But sometimes it did. Sometimes everything inside you went so still, it felt like something had died. He folded the papers once, tucked them into his worn jacket, and walked out into the cold Montana air. Bruno followed him without hesitation. The German shepherd moved like a shadow at Caleb's side, quiet, alert, always watching. His coat was darker than most, nearly black along the spine, fading into deep tan near his legs. One ear stood straight, the other slightly bent from an old injury no one had ever managed to fully fix. Caleb never tried. It made him easier to recognize. "Guess we own a ranch now," Caleb muttered, glancing down. Bruno didn't react, but his tail gave a slow, steady wag. The truck Caleb drove wasn't much better than the life he was trying to leave behind. Rust crawled along the doors, the engine coughed every time he turned the key, and the heater worked only when it felt like it. Still, it ran. That was enough. The road leading up into the mountains stretched long and empty. Pines closed in on both sides, their branches heavy and unmoving in the late afternoon light. The sky above was pale, washed thin by the cold. Caleb kept his hands steady on the wheel, but his eyes flicked constantly. Mirrors, treeline, road ahead, then back again. Always scanning, always expecting something. That part never left. A gust of wind pushed against the truck, and for a split second, the world shifted. The hum of the engine twisted into something else. The trees blurred into something darker. The road beneath him felt like dirt and heat and... Caleb blinked hard. The mountain road snapped back into place. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "You're here," he said under his breath. "You're not there anymore." Bruno shifted in the passenger seat, leaning slightly closer, pressing his weight into Caleb's leg just enough to be felt, grounding him. Caleb reached over, resting his hand briefly against the dog's neck. "Yeah," he murmured. "I know." The sun dipped lower as they climbed. The road narrowed until it barely deserved the name. Gravel replaced pavement, crunching beneath the tires. The forest thickened. The silence grew heavier. No houses, no lights, no people. Exactly the kind of place no one wanted. Exactly the kind of place Caleb had bought. By the time they reached the property line, the sky had begun to fade into gray. A broken wooden sign leaned crookedly against a fence post, half buried in weeds. The lettering had long since peeled away, leaving only faint scratches where a name used to be. Caleb slowed the truck, then stopped. For a moment he didn't move. He just sat there, staring. The land stretched out before him, wide, quiet, and wrong in a way he couldn't quite explain. The fields had long gone wild, swallowed by tall grass and brush. A sagging barn leaned to one side like it had given up years ago. The main house stood further back, its windows dark, its roofline uneven. It didn't look abandoned. It looked left behind, like something had ended here, and no one had come back to clean it up. Caleb swallowed. "Home sweet home," he said, though there was no humor in it. Bruno let out a low breath, eyes fixed ahead. Caleb noticed that. He noticed everything Bruno noticed. That was something the war had given him, an understanding that didn't need words. Bruno didn't bark, didn't growl, but he was watching the house with a focus that made Caleb's chest tighten just slightly. "You see something?" Caleb asked quietly. Bruno didn't look at him, just kept staring. The wind moved through the trees, carrying a faint, hollow sound across the land. It could have been anything: branches shifting, old wood creaking, air slipping through broken boards, or something else. Caleb forced himself to move. He put the truck in gear and drove forward, tires rolling over the cracked path toward the house. As they got closer, the details came into focus. The front porch sagged under its own weight. One of the support beams had split clean down the middle. The windows were clouded with dirt and time, but a few were broken outright, jagged edges catching what little light remained. The door hung slightly off-center. Not open, not closed. Just wrong. Caleb killed the engine. The silence that followed pressed in from all sides. No traffic, no distant voices, no hum of life anywhere. Just wind, and something beneath it. He opened the door and stepped out. Cold air hit him hard, sharp and clean, cutting through the layers of his jacket. Gravel crunched under his boots as he walked around to the passenger side. Bruno jumped down beside him in one smooth motion, landing light despite his size. For a moment, they both stood there, looking at the house. Caleb rolled his shoulders once, as if preparing for something he couldn't name. "Well," he said, voice low, "we've seen worse." That wasn't exactly true, but it was close enough. He took a step forward. Bruno stayed tight at his side. They moved together across the yard, the tall grass brushing against Caleb's legs. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the ground itself didn't want to give them up easily. Halfway to the porch, Caleb stopped. He didn't know why. Something in his chest tightened, a quiet warning he'd learned not to ignore. Yet his eyes scanned the windows again, slower this time. Still, empty. But the feeling didn't go away. Bruno shifted slightly in front of him now, just enough to put himself between Caleb and the house. Protective. Always. Caleb let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "It's just a house," he said, though it sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than the dog. Bruno didn't move, didn't relax. Caleb gave a small, tired nod. "Yeah," he muttered. "Thought so." He stepped forward again. This time he didn't stop. The porch creaked under his weight as he climbed the steps. The wood groaned, but it held. He reached for the door, fingers brushing against the rough, splintered surface. For a second, everything went quiet. Too quiet. Then he pushed. The door swung inward with a long, slow creak, the sound echoing into the darkness beyond. Cold air spilled out to meet him. Not the kind that came from outside, the kind that had been trapped somewhere for a long time. Caleb stood in the doorway, staring into the shadowed interior. Bruno stepped forward first. Always first. Caleb followed. And just like that, he walked into the worst decision he had ever made. Only, it didn't feel like a mistake. Not yet. Caleb stepped inside. The floor groaned beneath his boots, not sharply, but slowly, like the house was adjusting to his weight after years of emptiness. Dust hung in the air, stirred by the movement of the door behind him. It drifted through the dim light like smoke that had nowhere to go. Bruno moved ahead, nose low, ears forward. The dog didn't rush. He never did. Every step was deliberate, controlled, like as if he understood this place had rules Caleb hadn't learned yet. The smell hit next. Old wood, damp insulation, something faint beneath it. Metallic, maybe. Or maybe that was just Caleb's memory, trying to fill in gaps. He'd smelled too many places like this before. Abandoned structures, temporary shelters, places where people had been, and then suddenly weren't. Caleb shut the door behind him. The sound echoed deeper than it should have. Too deep. He stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. The living room stretched out in front of him, wide but hollow. A fireplace sat along the far wall, blackened from use long ago. A chair lay tipped over near the corner, its legs broken at odd angles like it had been dropped and never picked up again. Nothing had been taken. That was the strange part. Places that got abandoned usually got stripped clean. Furniture, fixtures, anything worth carrying. But here, things were still waiting. Waiting for someone who never came back. Caleb exhaled slowly. "You feel that?" he muttered. Bruno paused, not looking back, not acknowledging, just listening. The silence pressed in. It wasn't empty. It was layered. Wind outside. The faint tick of wood settling. A distant creak somewhere deeper in the house. Caleb's shoulders tightened without him realizing it. That sound. That exact kind of sound. For a split second, his mind betrayed him. The walls shifted. The room darkened. The smell changed. Burnt metal, dust, something sharper, something hot. His chest tightened as the past snapped forward, sharp and sudden. He was somewhere else. A different building, different walls. In same silence right before everything went wrong. Caleb blinked hard. The room snapped back. The cold Montana air filled his lungs again. He steadied himself with a slow breath. "You're here," he whispered. "You're home." The word felt foreign. Home. Bruno moved closer, brushing against Caleb's leg again, grounding him the same way he always had. Caleb reached down, his fingers finding the thick fur along Bruno's neck. He kept his hand there a moment longer this time. "Stay with me," he said quietly. Bruno didn't move away. That was answer enough. They moved deeper into the house together. The kitchen sat just beyond the living room, separated by a half wall that had begun to crumble at the edges. Cabinets hung crooked, some doors missing entirely. The sink was stained dark, the metal dulled with time. Caleb stepped forward, testing each part of the floor before putting his full weight down, still scanning, still calculating. That part of him wasn't broken. It was sharpened. Bruno entered the kitchen first. His head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring. Then he stopped. Not abruptly. Just stopped. Caleb noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked. Bruno didn't bark, didn't growl, but his body changed, subtle, almost invisible if you didn't know him. His stance widened just slightly. His tail lowered, not in fear, but in focus. His eyes fixed on something Caleb couldn't see. The floor, right near the center of the kitchen. Caleb followed his gaze. At first it looked like nothing, just old boards worn down from years of use. But then he saw it, a faint line, barely visible, running across the wood in a shape that didn't match the rest of the floor. He crouched slowly, running his fingers along the seam. Cold, slightly uneven. His brow tightened. "Just old wood," he murmured, more to himself than to Bruno. But Bruno didn't move, didn't look away. Caleb tapped the floor lightly with his knuckles. A dull sound answered back. He shifted a few inches to the side and tapped again. This time it sounded different. Hollow. He paused. The air in the room seemed to shift. A quiet tension settled in his chest. Not fear exactly, but something close enough to make his pulse pick up. He straightened slowly. "We'll check it later," he said, forcing a calm tone. Bruno didn't agree. He stayed planted exactly where he was, watching, waiting. Caleb turned away. He needed to see the rest of the house. I needed to understand what he'd just walked into. The hallway beyond the kitchen stretched long and narrow. Doors lined both sides, most of them closed. The wood beneath his boots creaked with each step, the sound traveling ahead of him like a warning. He opened the first door. A bedroom. Bare. Dust-covered. A mattress frame without the mattress. Nothing else. The second room was similar. Empty. Forgotten. The third. Caleb stopped before opening it. Something about that door felt different. There was no visible reason, no sound, no movement, but the same quiet instinct that had made him stop in the yard earlier returned now, stronger. Bruno moved up beside him again, closer this time, protective. Caleb rested his hand on the doorknob. Cold metal. He turned it slowly. The door creaked open. And inside was another room, but this one hadn't been completely emptied. A dresser stood against the far wall. A mirror hung above it, cracked clean down the middle. The glass reflected a distorted version of Caleb and Bruno, splitting them in two. He stepped inside. The floor creaked softly. His reflection shifted with him, fractured. For a moment, it didn't feel like he was alone. Caleb looked away. "Just a house," he muttered again. He checked the corners, the closet. Nothing. No movement. No sign of anyone. Still. The feeling lingered. He stepped back into the hallway and closed the door behind him. Bruno stayed close now, closer than before. As they made their way back toward the living room, the light outside had dimmed further. Shadows stretched longer through the broken windows, crawling slowly across the floor. And night was coming fast. Caleb didn't want to admit it, but the thought of being here in full darkness tightened something deep in his chest. He moved quicker now, back into the living room, back toward the front door. He opened it, letting the cold air rush in. The outside felt easier, simpler. But he couldn't stay out there forever. This was his place now, for better or worse. Caleb stepped back inside and shut the door again. This time, the sound didn't echo as far. He grabbed his duffel bag from near the entrance, setting it down beside the fireplace. He'd deal with heat later. For now, he just needed a place to sit, to breathe. Bruno circled once, then lay down near him, but not fully relaxed, still alert, still listening. Caleb leaned back against the wall, eyes half-lidded. The exhaustion crept in slowly, but not just from the drive, from everything. The war, the divorce, the silence that followed both. His head dipped slightly. Just for a second. And then, a sound. Soft. Low. From somewhere beneath him. Caleb's eyes snapped open. Bruno was already up, standing, focused, looking straight at the kitchen. Neither of them moved. The sound came again. A dull thud. Then something else. A slow dragging noise. Like weight being pulled across wood. Caleb's chest tightened. His breath slowed. Every instinct in his body lit up at once. Not panic. Not yet. But close. He pushed himself to his feet slowly. Bruno stepped in front of him again, between Caleb and the kitchen. The house had been silent before. Now it was listening back. And somewhere beneath the floor, something had just moved. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't need to. His body had already shifted, weight balanced, shoulders squared, breath slowed into something controlled and deliberate. The kind of stillness that came before action. Bruno stood rigid in front of him, not barking, not growling, just watching. The kitchen doorway loomed ahead, darker now that the last of the daylight had begun to fade. Shadows stretched across the floor like something alive to me, inching forward with the coming night. The sound didn't come again. But that didn't mean it was gone. Caleb stepped forward. One step, then another. Each movement measured, quiet. The floor creaked beneath him, but not loudly enough to break the tension building in the air. Bruno moved first. He always did. The dog advanced slowly into the kitchen, nose low, body angled slightly as if anticipating movement. While Caleb followed close behind, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every place something could hide. The seam in the floor stood out more clearly now, not because it had changed, but because Caleb was looking at it differently. He crouched again, closer this time. Bruno stayed right beside him, muscles tight. "Could be an animal," Caleb whispered, though his voice didn't carry much conviction. He pressed his palm flat against the wood. Cold, solid, still. For a long second, nothing happened. Then, a faint vibration, so slight it could have been imagination. Except Bruno reacted instantly. His head snapped downward, ears forward, body tensing. A low sound escaped his throat. Not loud, not aggressive, but certain. Something was there. Caleb's jaw tightened. "All right," he muttered. "He-ho." "All right." He stood up and moved quickly now, crossing the room toward his duffel bag. He dug through it with steady hands, pulling out a small flashlight and a folding knife. Not much, but enough. He clicked the flashlight on and returned to the kitchen. The beam cut through the growing darkness, landing squarely on the seam. The edges were uneven, worn from time, but not natural wear. This had been opened before, and closed again. Carefully. Caleb crouched and ran the knife blade along the line, pressing gently at first, then harder. The wood resisted. Then, a faint shift. A soft click. Caleb froze. Bruno stepped forward, pressing closer, his body now fully between Caleb and the center of the floor. "Easy," Caleb said under his breath. He slid the blade deeper into the seam and pried upward. The wood groaned, which dust shook loose from the edges, and then the section lifted, just slightly. Enough. Caleb set the knife aside and gripped the edge with both hands. Slowly, carefully, he pulled. The trapdoor rose with a long, aching creak, revealing a square opening beneath. Dark, deep. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying with it a smell that didn't belong to the house above. It wasn't rot. It wasn't decay. It was something older. Metal. Oil. Something that had been sealed away. Caleb angled the flashlight downward. The beam disappeared into blackness before catching the edge of something below. Wooden steps. Narrow. Steep. Leading down. Caleb didn't move. His chest rose slowly as he stared into the opening. Something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous in the immediate sense, but wrong in a way that settled deeper, much like stepping into a place you were never meant to find. Bruno leaned forward, sniffing the air. Then he did something Caleb hadn't expected. He stepped onto the first stair. "No," Caleb said sharply. Bruno paused, looked back. Not confused, not hesitant, just waiting. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Stay," he added, softer this time. Bruno held his position, but didn't step back. Caleb adjusted his grip on the flashlight. His pulse had picked up now, steady but faster. Not panic. Focus. The kind that pushed everything else aside. He moved to the edge of the opening, shined the light down again. Nothing moved. No sound. Just darkness and those narrow steps leading into it. Caleb swallowed. "Just checking," he muttered. He placed one foot onto the first step. The wood creaked under his weight, but it held. Now Bruno stayed above, watching. Caleb descended slowly. One step, then another. The air grew colder the further he went. Thicker. The kind that pressed against your lungs, making each breath feel heavier than the last. Halfway down, the light began to reveal more. Walls. Close. Rough. Not dirt. Wood paneling. Old. But not primitive. Built with purpose. At the bottom, the steps opened into a small space. Caleb stepped off carefully, sweeping the flashlight across the room. It wasn't large, but it wasn't random either. A table sat against one wall, covered in dust but still intact. Shelves lined another, holding objects that had been left untouched for years, maybe decades. A radio, old, military. A map pinned to the wall, its edges curled and faded. Caleb's breath caught. This wasn't a farmer's hidden storage. This was something else. He stepped forward, the beam of light trembling slightly now despite his effort to keep it steady. The map caught his attention first. It wasn't of the immediate land. It was broader, marked. Sections circled in red pencil, coordinates scribbled in tight, precise handwriting. Caleb stepped closer. His heart began to pound. He knew that style, that kind of marking. That wasn't civilian work. That was military. His military. Or something very close to it. He turned slowly, scanning the rest of the room. The table held a metal box, rectangular, locked once but now slightly ajar. Caleb hesitated, then reached out. His fingers brushed the lid. Cold. He pulled it open. Inside were files, paper, yellowed with age but preserved well enough to read. He lifted the top one carefully. The dust shifted. The paper cracked softly at the edges. Caleb angled the flashlight down. His eyes moved across the first page, then stopped. Just like that. His breath hitched. The world narrowed. The room disappeared. There was only that page, that name, printed clearly, unmistakably. Turner. Caleb didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. For a long, suspended moment, nothing existed except that single word staring back at him from the past. Above him, Bruno let out a low, warning growl. Caleb's head snapped up. The sound wasn't directed at him. It was directed toward the stairs, toward the opening. Caleb turned slowly, flashlight lifting. The beam reached up the steps, caught the edge of the trapdoor above. Still open, still empty. But something had changed. The air felt different, heavier, as if the house above had shifted in response, as if it knew he'd found something. Bruno's growl deepened. Caleb's grip tightened on the flashlight. He looked back down at the file in his hands, then back toward the stairs. The name on that page hadn't just changed everything. It had answered one question, and created 100 more. And suddenly, the silence above didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was waiting. Caleb didn't move. The file in his hand felt heavier than paper should. The name on it, his name, pressed into him like a weight he hadn't agreed to carry. Bruno's growl sharpened. Low, controlled. Not fear. Warning. Caleb slowly closed the metal box, his movements careful, deliberate. The faint scrape of lid against steel sounded louder than it should in that confined space. Easy, he whispered. But he wasn't sure if he meant it for Bruno or for himself. He stepped back toward the stairs, lifting the flashlight higher. The beam cut through the darkness above, reaching the edge of the kitchen floor. Nothing moved. Nothing visible. But the feeling didn't fade. It lingered, quiet and patient, like something listening from the other side. Caleb took the first step up. The wood creaked beneath him, the sound traveling upward, announcing his return. Each step felt slower than the last, like climbing out of something deeper than just a hidden room. Bruno backed up slowly as Caleb reached the top, never turning his back to the darkness above. The moment Caleb stepped into the kitchen again, Bruno shifted closer, pressing against his leg. Protective, always. Caleb swung the flashlight around the room. The same cabinets, and the same cracked sink, the same quiet. But it didn't feel the same. The air had changed. It was tighter now, charged. He crossed the kitchen quickly and lowered the trapdoor back into place. The wood settled with a dull thud, sealing the darkness beneath them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Bruno stepped forward again, right back to the center of the floor, watching. Caleb let out a slow breath. "You're not letting that go, are you?" he muttered. Bruno didn't look at him, didn't move. Caleb nodded once. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me neither." He turned and walked back into the living room, setting the flashlight on the floor beside his bag. The fading light outside barely reached through the windows now. The shadows had thickened, filling the corners of the room. Night had arrived, and with it, the weight of what he'd just found. Caleb sat down heavily against the wall, running a hand over his face. Turner, his name, in a place like this, on a file that clearly hadn't been meant to be found. It didn't make sense. His father had been a mechanic, quiet, steady, the kind of man who fixed things and kept his head down, the kind of man who didn't leave behind hidden rooms under abandoned houses, the kind of man who didn't disappear into something like this. Caleb shook his head slightly. "No," he murmured. "No, that's not right." But the doubt had already taken root. Bruno settled beside him again, though not fully relaxed. His ears twitched at every small sound, his body angled toward the kitchen. Caleb leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a memory. Not triggered by sound this time, not by smell. Just there. His father, standing in the garage late at night, the radio on low, a map spread across the workbench, lines drawn in pencil, coordinates scribbled in the margins. Caleb had been too young to understand, too young to ask the right questions. "You don't need to worry about this," his father had said once, folding the map quickly when he noticed Caleb watching. "Just grown-up stuff." Caleb squeezed his eyes shut. That memory had never meant anything before. Now it did. And that was the problem. He pushed himself to his feet again. Restlessness settled in his chest. He couldn't sit with this. Not yet. "Come on," he said quietly. Bruno stood instantly. Together, they moved back toward the kitchen. Caleb knelt again at the center of the floor, but his fingers traced the seam once more. This time, there was no hesitation. He pulled the trapdoor open again. The cold air rushed up faster now, sharper, more familiar. Caleb grabbed the flashlight and descended without stopping this time. Bruno followed. The dog didn't wait for permission anymore. At the bottom, Caleb moved straight to the metal box, flipping it open again. The files were still there, unchanged. But now, he was ready to look. He pulled the top folder free, opened it fully. The paper inside was dense with information. Typed lines, handwritten notes, dates that stretched back further than he expected. He skimmed at first, then slowed, then stopped. The words began to settle into place. Project references, supply routes, coordinates that matched the markings on the wall. And then, a line that made his stomach tighten. Asset relocation authorized under Turner oversight. Caleb's throat went dry. Oversight. Not participant. Not observer. Oversight. That meant authority. That meant involvement. That meant his father hadn't just been connected to this. He'd been running something. Caleb flipped to the next page. Photographs slid loose, falling onto the table. Black and white. Grainy. Men standing near crates. Military uniforms, but not standard issue. No insignias. No names. And in the background, a structure. Rough. Wooden. Familiar. Caleb lifted the photo closer to the light. His chest tightened. It was the house. This house. But newer. Stronger. Alive. And near the edge of the frame. A man. Half turned away, but not enough to hide his face completely. Caleb froze, and the resemblance hit like a blow. Same jawline, same posture, same eyes. His father. Younger, harder, different. Caleb lowered the photo slowly. The room felt smaller now, tighter, the air heavier. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. But it did. Too much of it did. Bruno shifted beside him, then suddenly turned toward the far wall. Caleb followed his gaze. The map, pinned there. He stepped closer. The red circles, the markings, they weren't random. They connected. A route, leading away from the house, out toward the land, toward something else. Caleb reached out and touched one of the points. His finger lingered there, and for the first time, the question formed clearly. What was his father hiding? And more importantly, why had it been left behind? Bruno let out a sharp, sudden bark, whence Caleb turned instantly. The dog was staring toward the stairs again, rigid, focused. Caleb's heart kicked hard in his chest. "Someone there?" he called out. No answer, just silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt closer. Caleb grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the steps, Bruno at his side. They climbed together, faster this time, more urgent. Caleb reached the top and pushed the trapdoor open. The kitchen lay still, empty, unchanged. But the back door, it was slightly open, just enough for the night air to slip through. Caleb stopped. He was sure. He hadn't left it like that. Bruno moved ahead, stepping carefully toward the door. His nose lifted, scenting. His body stiffened. Caleb's voice dropped. "Bruno?" The dog didn't look back, didn't move away. He stood there, staring out into the darkness beyond the doorway, listening, watching. And Caleb knew. They weren't alone out here anymore. The cold air slipped through the open back door, brushing against his face like a warning. Caleb didn't rush. He had learned the hard way. Rushing got you killed. You moved slow. You watched. You listened. Bruno took one careful step forward, then another, nose lifted into the night. His body was tense, every muscle ready, but he didn't bark. That was what made it worse. If Bruno barked, there was something there. If Bruno stayed quiet, it meant something had been there. Caleb's voice dropped low. Easy. Bruno's tail lowered slightly, but he didn't relax. Caleb stepped forward, placing himself just behind the dog, one hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his side. It wasn't much, but it was something. He pushed the door open wider. The night stretched out beyond the threshold, dark, endless, and still. The trees stood like silent witnesses, their branches unmoving. The wind had died down, leaving behind a kind of quiet that pressed against the ears. Caleb stepped outside. The gravel crunched under his boots, louder than it should have been. Bruno moved ahead, scanning the yard. The truck sat where he left it. The barn leaned the same way. Nothing moved. Nothing. Caleb froze. There, near the edge of the property. A shape. Gone before he could focus on it. His breath slowed. Did you see that? He whispered. Bruno had. The dog's head snapped toward the tree line, body angled, ready. Caleb took a step forward, then stopped. No. Too exposed, too open. He stepped back instead, but retreated to the doorway. Not like this, he muttered. Bruno didn't argue. He backed up with him, step for step, never turning his back to the darkness. Caleb shut the door firmly. This time he locked it. The click echoed through the house. Too loud, too final. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Bruno let out a low breath and turned his attention back to Caleb. Caleb ran a hand over his face. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. But nothing was okay. The house felt different now. Not just abandoned, occupied. Not by something visible, but by something that knew. He moved back into the living room, pacing slowly, his mind working faster than his body. Someone had been here. Someone had opened that door. Someone had been close enough to the house to leave it that way, and close enough to see him. And Caleb stopped. The thought settled in like a stone. They know I'm here. Bruno's ears twitched. Caleb looked toward the kitchen, then toward the hallway, then back to the door. The options ran through his mind, one after another. Leave, drive down the mountain, forget all of this. But the image of the file flashed in his mind. Turner, his father, the bunker, the map, the truth. Caleb's jaw tightened. No, he said quietly. He wasn't leaving, not this time. He had spent too long running from things he didn't understand. Too long pretending the past didn't matter. Not anymore. He grabbed the flashlight again and moved back toward the hidden room. Bruno followed without hesitation. The trapdoor opened easier this time, like it had been waiting. They descended together. The air below felt colder now, sharper, and alive. Caleb moved straight to the table, pulling the file back into his hands. He flipped through the pages faster now, looking, searching. The words blurred at first, then began to settle. Names, dates, operations, locations, and then Sissa. A section marked in bold type. Personnel dates. Restricted oversight. Caleb's eyes moved down the list, then stopped. Turner, Elias. Caleb's breath caught. Elias. His father's name. Not a mechanic. Not a quiet man who fixed engines and avoided trouble. But someone buried deep in something classified. Something hidden. Something dangerous enough to erase. Caleb's hands tightened around the paper. You lied to me, he whispered. Not angry, Not yet. Just hollow. He flipped to the next page. A report. Brief. Clinical. Asset secured. Relocation incomplete. A civilian exposure risk high. Caleb frowned. Civilian exposure. That meant witnesses. That meant people who weren't supposed to see what was happening. His pulse quickened. He kept reading. Recommendation. Site abandonment with contingencies. Caleb's brow furrowed deeper. Contingencies. That meant backup plans. Fail-safes. Things left behind in case something went wrong. His eyes drifted toward the map again. The red circles. The path leading away from the house. Toward the land. Toward something hidden deeper. Caleb swallowed. This wasn't the only place, he murmured. Bruno shifted beside him, then suddenly moved toward the far corner of the room. Caleb followed. The dog was focused on the wall now. Not the map, not the table. The wall itself. Bruno sniffed along the wood paneling, then scratched lightly at one section. Caleb crouched beside him. What is it? The wood here was different. Smoother. Less worn. Caleb pressed against it. Solid. But there. A faint draft. His breath slowed. Another door. Another hidden space. He ran his fingers along the edges, searching. No visible handle. No obvious opening. Just a thin seam. Caleb leaned closer. And that's when he saw it. A small marking. Burned into the wood. Faint. Almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. A symbol. Simple. Sharp. Military. Caleb's chest tightened. He'd seen it before. Not here. Not in this life. But back there. In briefings. On documents no one talked about outside closed rooms. His voice dropped to a whisper. This wasn't just storage. Bruno let out a soft sound beside him. Agreement. Caleb leaned back slightly, staring at the wall, at the symbol, at everything it meant. His father hadn't just been involved. He had been part of something buried so deep it had been erased. And now, Caleb had found it. A sudden sound echoed faintly from above. Footsteps. Caleb froze. Bruno's head snapped upward instantly. Both of them went still, listening. Another step. Slow, careful. Above them, inside the house. Caleb's grip tightened around the flashlight. His voice dropped to nothing. They're inside. Bruno stepped closer to him, ready. Caleb looked once more at the hidden wall, then toward the stairs, then back at the file in his hand. Everything had changed. And now, whoever had been watching had finally come closer. Caleb didn't move. Not even to breathe. The sound above them was faint, but unmistakable. A step, then another. Slow, measured, like whoever it was knew exactly where they were. Bruno's body lowered slightly, muscles tightening, ears locked forward. A quiet growl vibrated deep in his chest, controlled but ready to explode if needed. Caleb leaned in close, his voice barely a whisper. Stay quiet. Bruno obeyed instantly. Caleb's eyes flicked toward the stairs, then back to the wall, then back to the stairs again. He had two choices, hide or go up. He exhaled slowly. There was a time when he would have rushed toward the threat, kicked the door in, forced the fight. That man had almost died more times than he could count. This man. He thought first. Caleb reached down and grabbed the metal box, sliding it shut with care. Yet he tucked the most important file, the one with his father's name, inside his jacket. Not everything, just enough. Then he motioned to Bruno. Slow. They moved together toward the stairs. Each step upward felt heavier than the last. The wood creaked. Too loud. Too exposed. Halfway up, the sound above stopped. Silence. Caleb froze. His pulse hammered in his ears. He lifted the flashlight slightly, angling it toward the top, but not enough to give away his exact position. Nothing. No movement. No shadow crossing the doorway. Just stillness. Bruno stepped up beside him, pressing close. Waiting. Caleb counted in his head. 1, 2, 3. Still nothing. He took the final step. Pushed the trapdoor open just enough to see. The kitchen lay in front of him. Dark. Empty. But something was wrong. The chair near the wall. It had been upright before. Now it was tipped slightly. Not fallen. Just moved. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He pushed the trapdoor open fully and climbed out. Bruno followed instantly, positioning himself just ahead of Caleb, scanning every corner. Caleb turned slowly, sweeping the flashlight across the room. Cabinets, sink, door, nothing. But the air felt disturbed, like it had been moved through recently. Caleb stepped forward. One step, then another. He reached the center of the kitchen. The floor beneath him felt the same, but the silence didn't. Bruno moved toward the back door, stopped, sniffed. Then, a sharp bark, short, alert. Caleb turned instantly. The door, still locked, still closed. But the frame, a faint scratch along the wood, fresh. Caleb stepped closer, running his fingers along the mark. Recent, very recent. They tried the door, he whispered. Bruno's growl deepened. Caleb turned toward the hallway. That was where the sound had come from. He moved carefully, each step placed with intent. The hallway stretched ahead, darker now. The doors on either side seemed to lean inward, closing in. Caleb reached the first doorway. Empty. The second. Nothing. The third. He paused. The same room as before. The one with the cracked mirror. The door stood slightly open, wider than he remembered leaving it. Caleb's grip tightened on the flashlight. Behind me, he murmured. Bruno shifted, positioning himself just behind Caleb's leg this time, ready to move past him in an instant if needed. Caleb pushed the door open slowly. The hinges creaked. The beam of light cut into the room. The dresser, the mirror, the broken line down the glass. Everything looked the same, except for one thing. The dust. There was a mark across it now, a clear line, like something had been dragged across the surface. Caleb stepped inside. His boots made almost no sound. He moved toward the dresser. The mark led to the edge, to the floor. He lowered the flashlight. Another mark. Faint. But there. Leading toward the closet. Bruno moved ahead this time. Faster. He reached the closet door and stopped. His body went rigid. Then, a sudden, explosive bark. The door swung open. Empty. Nothing inside but old wood and darkness. But the smell. Caleb noticed it immediately. Different. Human. Recent. His chest tightened. They were here, he said quietly. Not guessing, knowing. Bruno turned, moving back toward Caleb, but not relaxing. Still alert, still searching. Caleb stepped back out into the hallway. His mind raced. They had been inside. Close. Close enough to move things. Close enough to watch him. Close enough to know where he was. A sudden sound cut through the silence. Outside. Engine. Low, distant. But growing. Caleb moved quickly now, heading toward the front of the house. Bruno ran ahead. They reached the living room just as headlights swept across the broken windows. Bright. Blinding. Caleb dropped low instantly, pulling Bruno down with him. The light passed across the walls, then settled. Stopped. Right outside. The engine idled. Caleb's breathing slowed again, controlled. He moved carefully to the edge of the window, staying low, peered out. A black SUV, one parked just beyond the gate. Two silhouettes inside, watching, waiting. Caleb's jaw tightened. "They're not hiding anymore," he whispered. Bruno let out a low, steady growl. Caleb's mind moved fast. Options, distance, time. They hadn't come closer yet. That meant something. They were observing, testing. Caleb shifted back from the window. He didn't panic, didn't run. Not this time. He reached for his phone. No signal. Of course. He let out a quiet breath. Figures. The engine outside continued to idle, unmoving, unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. Caleb looked down at Bruno. The dog met his gaze, steady, unshaken. Caleb nodded once. "All right," he said quietly. "We do this smart." Bruno's tail flicked once. Caleb moved back toward the kitchen, toward the trapdoor, toward the only place they had that wasn't exposed. As he lifted the wood again, the cold air rushed up to meet him. But this time, it didn't feel like something hidden. It felt like something waiting. And outside, the headlights stayed on, like eyes that refused to blink. Caleb didn't look back again. He didn't need to. He could feel them out there, waiting, watching, measuring him the same way he was measuring them. He lowered the trapdoor slowly, sealing the hidden room beneath the kitchen floor once more. The wood settled into play with a dull, final sound. "Down," he whispered. Bruno obeyed instantly, slipping into the darkness below without hesitation. Caleb followed, pulling the door shut above them, cutting off the light from the house. Everything went black. For a moment there was nothing. No light. No sound. Or just breath. Caleb clicked the flashlight on again, the beam slicing through the darkness. The small room below felt tighter now, more confined, but also safer. At least for the moment. Bruno stood close, his shoulder brushing Caleb's leg. Caleb exhaled slowly. "They're not here for the house," he murmured. "They're here for what's in it." Bruno's ears flicked. Caleb glanced toward the map on the wall. The red markings, the lines, the path. It hadn't been just a record. It had been instructions, a route, a fallback, something his father had planned for. Caleb stepped closer, studying it more carefully this time. The circles weren't random. They connected in a line that moved away from the house, down through the property, toward the lower land, toward water. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "The river," he said quietly. Bruno shifted beside him. Caleb turned back toward the metal box, flipping through the files again. Faster now, more focused. Then, a line, short, almost easy to miss. "If relocation fails, final contingency follows river line. Marked." Caleb's pulse quickened. Marked. His eyes flicked back to the map. One of the red circles near the edge of the paper was darker than the others, pressed harder, more deliberate. He reached out and traced it with his finger. That's where it leads, he said. Bruno let out a low breath. Caleb looked at him. You already knew that, didn't you? The dog didn't answer, but he didn't look surprised either. Caleb leaned back slightly, thinking. The SUV was still outside. The men hadn't moved. They were waiting for him to make a mistake, to panic, to run. Caleb's jaw tightened. I'm not giving them that. He shut the metal box again and slung his bag over his shoulder. The file stayed inside his jacket, close to his chest. Then he looked toward the stairs. We don't go back through them, he said quietly. Bruno's head tilted slightly. Caleb nodded toward the far wall. The other way. The hidden wall. The symbol burned into the wood. If there was one concealed space, there could be more. Caleb moved toward it, running his hand along the paneling again, searching. This time he pressed harder, listened, felt. There. A faint shift beneath his palm. He adjusted his grip and pushed. The panel resisted, then gave. A narrow section slid inward with a soft, hidden click. A second passage revealed itself, darker, narrower, but real. Caleb let out a quiet breath. Contingency, he whispered. Bruno stepped forward immediately, slipping into the opening. Caleb followed. The space beyond was tight, barely wide enough for him to move through comfortably. The air smelled older here, earthier, less touched by the world above. The beam of the flashlight revealed a tunnel, wood reinforced in places, rough dirt in others, sloping slightly downward. Caleb moved carefully, one hand brushing the wall to keep his balance. Bruno stayed ahead, guiding, always guiding. The tunnel stretched on longer than Caleb expected, 10 feet, 20, then more. The house above disappeared. The silence changed again, no longer heavy but hollow, open. They were moving away, away from the house, away from the watchers. Caleb's breathing steadied, his thoughts sharpened. If this tunnel existed, then his father had planned for this, and planned for escape, planned for someone to follow it. Caleb's chest tightened. For me? He murmured. The question hung there, unanswered. After what felt like several minutes, the tunnel began to slope upward. The air shifted, cooler, fresher. Bruno quickened his pace. Caleb followed. Then, a faint light ahead. Not artificial, natural. Moonlight. They reached the end. A wooden hatch, partially buried beneath dirt and leaves. Bruno scratched at it once, twice. Caleb stepped forward and pushed. The hatch lifted with a soft groan, and cool night air rushed in. They emerged into the open. The forest surrounded them now, thicker, deeper, far from the house. Caleb turned back. From here, the ranch wasn't visible. Only trees, only darkness, only distance. He let out a slow breath. We're clear, he said. Bruno stood beside him, scanning the woods. Not relaxed, but calmer. Caleb adjusted his jacket, feeling the file against his chest. The weight of it had changed. Before, it had been a question. Now, it was a direction. He looked ahead, through the trees, listening. The faint sound of water reached him, soft, steady. The river. Caleb nodded once. That's where we go. Bruno moved forward without hesitation. Caleb followed. The ground beneath his boots shifted from dry leaves to damp earth as they descended. The sound of the river grew louder with each step. The trees thinned. The land opened. And then, they saw it. The river cut through the land like a dark ribbon, reflecting the pale moonlight above. The current moved slow but steady, whispering against the rocks along its edge. Caleb stepped closer, but his eyes scanned the area, searching. There had to be a marker, something his father had left behind, something that meant… There, on the far side of a large oak tree, a carving, faint, but deliberate. Caleb approached slowly. The symbol burned into the wood was unmistakable, the same one from the hidden wall, the same one from the past. Bruno stood beside him, watching. Caleb reached out, running his fingers over the carving. It was old, but not forgotten. "This is it," he said quietly. His eyes moved outward, scanning the ground, the rocks, the base of the tree, looking for anything that didn't belong. Then, a shape. Subtle, almost invisible beneath the dirt. A flat metal edge. Caleb knelt down, brushing away the soil with his hands. The outline became clear. A hatch, sealed, hidden, waiting. Yet his breath slowed. His heart picked up. He looked at Bruno. The dog met his gaze, steady, certain. Caleb nodded once. "All right," he said. His voice was calm, but something deeper had shifted. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was discovery, truth, and whatever waited beneath that hatch had been waiting a long time. Caleb reached for the edge and began to pull. The metal didn't give at first. It held firm, sealed by time, by dirt, by whatever had been meant to keep it hidden. Caleb adjusted his grip, digging his fingers under the lip of the hatch, boots pressing into the damp ground for leverage. "Come on," he muttered. Bruno stood close, watching, his breath steady, eyes fixed on the ground like he already knew what waited below. Caleb pulled harder. The hatch shifted. A dull, grinding sound broke through the quiet of the riverbank. Dirt cracked loose around the edges. The seal gave just enough. Then, with one final effort, it opened. A breath of cold air rushed out, stronger than before, carrying with it a scent that didn't belong to the forest. Metal, oil, and something else. Something long untouched. Caleb leaned back slightly, catching his breath. His heart was pounding now, not from fear, but from anticipation, from knowing this was it. Bruno stepped forward, nose low, sniffing the opening. Caleb angled the flashlight down. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a ladder bolted into concrete walls. Concrete. Not wood. Not makeshift. This was deliberate, built to last. Caleb exhaled slowly. "This wasn't a backup," he whispered. This was the plan. Bruno placed one paw onto the ladder. Caleb gave a small nod. "Stay close." The dog descended first, always first. Caleb followed, his boots hitting the metal rungs with soft, controlled steps. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The sounds of the river faded, replaced by something heavier. Stillness. At the bottom, Caleb stepped onto solid ground. Concrete floor. Wide space. The flashlight swept across the room and stopped. Caleb didn't move. For a moment, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. It wasn't small. It wasn't hidden in the way the house had been. This was a bunker. A real one. Walls reinforced with steel beams. Shelves lined with crates, stacked carefully, untouched by time. A long table in the center of the room, covered in documents, maps, equipment. And along the far wall, a safe. Not modern, not electronic, but massive, industrial, built like something meant to outlast everything above it. Caleb took a slow step forward, then another. The beam of the flashlight trembled slightly now, catching on the edges of what lay before him. Crates marked with faded military codes, sealed boxes, metal cases. He approached one of them, kneeling carefully. His hand hovered over the lid, then pressed. He opened it. Inside, stacks, neatly wrapped, preserved, cash, bundles of it, old, but intact. Caleb's breath caught. Jesus. He sat back slightly, the weight of it hitting him all at once. Not a few thousand, not something small. This was more. Much more. Bruno stayed beside him, but his attention wasn't on the money. He turned his head, scanning the room, but watching, listening. Caleb noticed that, and it grounded him. He closed the crate slowly. This wasn't the point. It never had been. He stood and moved toward the table. The documents were organized. Too organized. Folders labeled with dates, operations, names. His fingers brushed across them until he found one marked differently. Bold. Deliberate. Final records. Caleb opened it. Inside. Photographs. Reports. Signed statements. His eyes moved quickly, absorbing what he could. Then slowed. Then stopped. Names. Familiar. Not from his past, but from the world. People who were still out there. People who held power. People who weren't supposed to be connected to anything like this. Caleb's chest tightened. This wasn't just military, he whispered. This was bigger. Bruno shifted behind him, while Caleb turned slightly. The dog was staring toward the far corner, again, focused. Caleb followed his gaze. Another crate. Different from the others. Smaller. More personal. He walked toward it slowly. Opened it. Inside. A leather folder. Worn. Used. Not archived. Not filed away like the others. This had been handled. Often. Caleb picked it up. Opened it. The first page hit him harder than anything else had. A photograph. Color. Faded, but clear enough. A man stood in front of the same river above. Younger. Stronger. Eyes sharp. Alive in a way Caleb had never known him. Elias Turner. His father. Caleb's throat tightened. You were here, he whispered. He flipped the page. Notes. Handwritten. Not typed. Not official. Personal. If this is found, as it means I failed to clean it up. Caleb's breath slowed. The room seemed to close in. He kept reading. They'll come for it. They always do, but this isn't for them. Caleb's fingers tightened around the paper. This is for whoever comes after. For the one who still asks questions. His chest rose slowly. His voice barely formed the words. Me. Bruno stepped closer, pressing against him. Caleb didn't look away from the page. I couldn't tell you the truth, the note continued. Not while it could get you killed. I kept you away for a reason. Caleb swallowed hard. I'm sorry. The word hit deeper than anything else. Not explanation. Not justification. Just sorry. Caleb lowered the paper slightly. His hands weren't shaking, but something inside him was. All those years, all those unanswered questions, and all those quiet nights where his father had seemed distant. It hadn't been distance. It had been protection. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. The next page. Coordinates. Instructions. More paths. More locations. This bunker wasn't the only one. Bruno suddenly tensed. Caleb's head snapped up. A sound, faint, distant, but unmistakable. From above, from the direction of the river. Voices. Caleb moved instantly, killing the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room. He held still, listening. The voices were muffled, but real. Closer than before. They had followed. Bruno's body pressed against him, silent now. Ready. Caleb's mind raced. They weren't safe here. Not anymore. He looked down at the folder in his hands, at his father's words, at everything this place held, and then back toward the ladder, toward the world above. His voice dropped to a whisper. They found us. Bruno didn't move, didn't hesitate. He was already ready. And Caleb, for the first time since stepping onto this land, wasn't just surviving anymore. He was in it now. Fully. And there was no turning back. Caleb stayed in the dark. He didn't reach for the flashlight, didn't move toward the ladder. He just listened. The voices above the bunker were clearer now, carried faintly through the metal and soil, low, controlled, not loud enough to echo. People who knew how to move without being heard. Caleb's jaw tightened. Not amateurs, he whispered. Bruno's ears flicked, catching every shift in sound. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark. He was locked in, focused the same way Caleb was, the same way they had both been trained to be. Caleb slowly crouched, setting the folder down for a moment, letting his breathing settle into something steady. In, out. Slow, he closed his eyes briefly. And just like that, the bunker disappeared. The cold concrete faded. The smell of earth and metal shifted. Heat, dust, the sound of distant movement. Boots, voices. The memory came fast this time, not as a flash, not as a jolt, but as something deeper, something familiar. He was back there again, waiting, listening, knowing something was about to happen, but not when, not how, not from which direction. Caleb's chest tightened, his fingers curled slightly against the floor. For a moment, he wasn't here anymore. He was there. Again. Bruno moved closer, not suddenly, not sharply, just enough, and his shoulder pressed into Caleb's arm, solid, real, present. Caleb's eyes snapped open. The bunker came back. The cold air, the darkness, the sound above. "You're here," Caleb whispered. He reached out, gripping the fur at Bruno's neck for a second longer than usual, grounding, pulling himself back. The voices above shifted, closer now. One of them moved across the ground directly over the hatch. A faint vibration traveled through the ceiling. Caleb's entire body went still. If they opened it, if they came down, there would be nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. His eyes moved quickly across the room. The ladder, the walls, the crates. Then, the far side, a narrow door, almost hidden, set into the concrete. Caleb hadn't noticed it before. His breath slowed. "Of course," he murmured. "Contingency. Oh, always contingency." He reached for the folder again, slipping it back inside his jacket. Then he moved. Slow. Silent. Bruno followed immediately. They crossed the bunker floor without a sound. Above them, one of the voices stopped. Then, a metallic thud. The hatch. Someone testing it. Caleb didn't look back. He reached the narrow door and pressed against it. It resisted, then shifted. Unlocked. He pulled it open just enough to slip through. A second tunnel, smaller, more confined, but real. Caleb stepped inside. Bruno slipped in behind him. Caleb pulled the door closed. Darkness swallowed them again. He didn't turn the light on. Not yet. He waited. Above them, the hatch groaned, opened. Voices. Clear now. They were here. A pause. Recently. Caleb's heart hammered once, hard, then slowed again. He leaned his head back against the cold wall, closed his eyes, and listened. Footsteps descended into the bunker. Heavy, deliberate, more than one. Caleb didn't move, didn't breathe louder than necessary. The voices echoed faintly through the concrete. Check everything. Take what matters. Leave nothing. Caleb's jaw tightened. Leave nothing. That meant this wasn't just about taking, it was about erasing. Bruno shifted slightly beside him. Caleb placed a hand against the dog's shoulder. Steady. Still. The sounds below continued. Crates opening, metal scraping, papers shifting. Then, a pause. A different tone. Looks like he found it. Caleb's chest tightened. They knew, not just that someone had been here, but that someone had seen, had understood. Caleb opened his eyes in the darkness, and his thoughts moved faster now. They weren't just protecting something. They were protecting it from him, from what he might do with it, from what it meant. The voices above shifted again. Clear it. Another pause, then silence. The kind that came before action. Caleb's pulse picked up. He didn't need to see it. Didn't need to hear more. He knew what was coming. His voice dropped to a whisper. We move. Bruno was already ready. Caleb turned, moving deeper into the narrow tunnel. This one sloped upward slowly. Longer than the first, tighter. The walls pressed in on both sides. The air felt thinner, harder to breathe. Behind them, a sound. Low, sharp, contained, followed by a deep, hollow thump. The bunker. Something inside it. Gone. Caleb didn't look back, didn't slow down. His chest rose and fell faster now, but his steps stayed controlled. Forward, always forward. The tunnel stretched on. His legs began to burn, his lungs tightened. The air shifted, colder. Then, fresh. A faint draft brushed against his face. Bruno picked up speed. Caleb followed. The tunnel ended at another hatch, smaller this time, less reinforced. Caleb pushed it open. The night air rushed in. They emerged onto a hillside higher than before. The river stretched below them, winding through the land. The ranch sat in the distance, small, dark, and near it, lights, movement. The SUV was still there, another vehicle now beside it. More figures, more activity. Caleb stood still for a moment, looking down, watching. His chest rose slowly, then settled. They're not leaving, he said quietly. Bruno stood beside him, calm, ready. Caleb looked down at his hands, still steady, no shaking. Not now, not anymore. The fear was still there, but it wasn't in control. Not this time. He looked back toward the land, toward the ranch, toward everything that had just been uncovered. His voice was quiet, but firm. This didn't end back there. Bruno's ears flicked. Caleb nodded once. No, he said. It followed us home. The wind moved through the trees around them, soft, constant, alive. Caleb turned away from the view, from the past, from the bunker, from the men who thought they could erase it all. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was running anymore. He felt like he was choosing. And whatever came next, he would meet it, head on. Caleb didn't rush down the hillside. That was the first difference. The old version of him, the one shaped by orders, adrenaline, and reaction, would have moved fast, cut straight through the trees, closed the distance without thinking. This version. He watched first. He studied the land below, the angles, the shadows, the spacing between the vehicles. The two SUVs were parked near the house, their headlights casting long beams across the yard. Figures moved between them, slow, methodical, confident. They weren't searching anymore. They were working. "They think it's theirs," Caleb murmured. Bruno stood beside him, silent, eyes fixed on the same scene. Caleb crouched, lowering himself into the cover of the brush. The night wrapped around them, shielding them, hiding them from the open space below. "They don't know we're out here," he said quietly. While Bruno's tail flicked once, Caleb nodded. "That's our advantage." He moved carefully along the ridge, keeping low, using the terrain to stay out of sight. Each step was placed with intention, each movement calculated. The closer they got, the clearer the sounds became. Voices, doors opening, metal shifting. One of the men laughed softly. They missed half of it. Caleb's jaw tightened. Of course they had. The bunker wasn't meant to be obvious. It was meant to survive. Just like the rest of it. Caleb stopped behind a cluster of trees, just close enough to see the edge of the yard clearly. One man stood near the front porch, speaking into a phone. "We've secured the site. Yeah, most of it's gone." A pause. "No, nothing left that matters." Caleb's eyes narrowed. They were wrong. And that was the only reason he still had a chance. Bruno shifted slightly, leaning forward. Caleb placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not yet." They waited. Watched. Time stretched. The men moved in patterns now, checking the house, the barn, the perimeter. One of them kicked at the ground near the kitchen, then shook his head. No sign of him. Caleb's breath slowed. They hadn't found the tunnel. They hadn't found the second exit. They didn't know. That changed everything. Another voice cut through the night. "He's still out there. He knows something." Caleb's eyes flicked toward the speaker. Tall, broad, confident. Not just a worker, someone higher, someone who gave orders. Caleb studied him carefully, memorizing. The man turned slightly, scanning the tree line. For a brief second, their eyes aligned, a distance too far to see clearly. But something passed between them. Awareness. Caleb didn't move. Didn't blink. The man held his gaze a moment longer, then looked away. Not convinced, but not certain either. Caleb exhaled slowly. "He's the one," he whispered. Bruno's ears stayed locked forward. The moment stretched. Then, movement. A sudden shift near the barn. One of the men stepped away from the group, walking toward the darker edge of the property, toward the trees, toward them. Caleb's body tensed. "Stay behind me," he murmured. Bruno didn't hesitate. The man moved closer, boots crunching softly over gravel, then dirt. His silhouette grew clearer, hand near his side, not relaxed, not careless. Caleb adjusted his position slightly, lowering himself further into the shadows. The man stopped, just a few yards away. Close enough now. Too close. He scanned the trees, listening. Caleb held his breath. Bruno didn't move, didn't make a sound. The man took one more step forward. Then, a twig snapped. Not from Caleb, not from Bruno, from somewhere else. The man turned sharply toward the sound. Caleb moved instantly. Fast. Silent. He closed the distance in 2 steps, grabbing the man from behind, pulling him back into the darkness. No shout, no struggle loud enough to carry. Just a brief, controlled movement. Then stillness. Caleb held him there a moment longer, ensuring no sound escaped, then eased him down. Carefully. Controlled. Bruno stood beside him, watching, ready. Caleb's chest rose slowly, then settled. He looked back toward the yard. No reaction, no alarm. They hadn't noticed. Not yet. Now Caleb reached down, quickly checking the man. Nothing useful. No identification. No answers. Just another piece of something bigger. He stood again. "We can't stay here," he whispered. Bruno shifted closer. Caleb's mind moved quickly now. They had seen enough, learned enough, survived enough. This wasn't about holding the land anymore. This was about what came next. "They'll come back," he said, "with more." Bruno's ears flicked. Caleb looked down at him. "And next time, they won't miss." A sudden sound broke through the night. A door slamming, voices rising. "Hey, where'd he go?" Caleb's head snapped up. They had noticed. Not what happened, but that something had changed. He didn't wait. "Move!" They slipped back into the trees, disappearing into the darkness as the voices behind them grew louder, and lights swept across the land. Shouts followed, but they were already gone. Back into the wild, back into the unknown. Caleb didn't slow until the sounds faded behind them. Then he stopped, turned, looked back one last time. The ranch, the house, the life he had just stepped into. It was no longer quiet, no longer hidden, no longer safe. Caleb's voice was low, steady. "They came for the past." He looked down at Bruno. The dog met his gaze, unshaken, unbreakable. Caleb nodded once. Now they're going to have to deal with the present. And for the first time, it wasn't fear in his chest. It was something else, something sharper, something stronger. Resolve. The war hadn't ended. It had just followed him home. And this time, he wasn't going to lose. Yet they didn't stop moving until the night had thinned into gray. Dawn came slowly over the mountains, washing the treetops in a pale light that felt almost unreal after the darkness behind them. Caleb finally slowed near a ridge overlooking a narrow valley, far enough from the ranch that the vehicles and lights were no longer visible. Bruno's pace softened beside him. The dog was still alert, but tired. Caleb noticed it immediately. "Easy," he said, his voice low. They reached a fallen log, and Caleb sank down onto it, shoulders dropping for the first time since the night began. His breath came heavier now, not from fear, but from everything catching up. The silence here was different. Not tense, not watching, just quiet. Bruno circled once and lay down near Caleb's feet. Caleb reached out automatically, and his hand finding the familiar place behind Bruno's ear. The dog didn't move away. He never did. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the valley below. "They're not going to stop," he said. Bruno's ear twitched. Caleb nodded slightly. "They won't just take what's left. They'll come after anyone who's seen it." He glanced down at his jacket, at the file hidden inside, at the truth he hadn't asked for. His jaw tightened. "They're already doing it." The memory of the bunker came back sharp. The crates, the money, the names. The names. People who didn't belong in a place like that. People who wouldn't let something like that surface. Caleb leaned back slightly, staring at the sky. For years, he had tried to leave things behind. The war, the noise, and the decisions that never really left your head. He had told himself coming back meant it was over, that he could build something simple, quiet. But the truth didn't care where you went. It followed. It waited. And when it caught up, it didn't ask permission. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Clear, focused, different. "I'm not running from this," he said. Bruno lifted his head. Caleb looked at him. "And I'm not fighting it the way they expect." The dog held his gaze. Steady. Caleb gave a small nod. "They want it buried," he continued. "They want it gone." His voice sharpened. "So we do the opposite." Bruno stood slowly, as if he understood. Caleb pushed himself up as well. His body still carried the weight of everything, but something inside him had shifted. Not anger, not fear, but purpose. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folder again, opened it. The pages moved in the morning breeze. Names, records, proof, not just of what had happened, but of who had been involved. Caleb looked at it differently now, not as a burden, but as leverage. "This isn't just money," he said quietly. "This is power." Bruno stepped closer. Caleb folded the papers carefully. "And if we use it right." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The direction was clear. They moved again. Down the ridge, toward the road. The nearest town was miles away, but Caleb knew the terrain now. He knew how to move unseen, how to use the land to his advantage. By the time the sun had fully risen, they reached the edge of a narrow road that cut through the valley. Caleb stopped, looked down both directions. All empty. Good. He turned to Bruno. "Stay close." They followed the road until the trees thinned and the first signs of town appeared. An old gas station, a diner with a flickering sign, a small row of buildings that looked like they hadn't changed in decades. Caleb walked straight to the diner. The bell above the door rang softly as he stepped inside. A few people looked up, then looked away. He didn't stand out here, not the way he thought he might. Just another man passing through. He took a seat near the counter. Bruno lay down beside him without needing to be told. The waitress approached, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "Long night?" she asked. Caleb nodded once. "That obvious?" She gave a small smile. "Out here, everything's obvious." She walked away. Caleb wrapped his hands around the mug, on letting the heat settle into his palms. For a moment, it felt normal. Almost. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. No signal last night. But here, a bar. Then two. Enough. He scrolled through his contacts. Stopped on a name. Daniel Brooks. The last lawyer Caleb had spoken to during his divorce. Not a friend. Not exactly. But someone who understood how things worked. Caleb hesitated. Then pressed call. It rang once and twice, and then, "Turner?" a voice answered. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Yeah." A pause. "Didn't expect to hear from you again." Caleb glanced down at the folder, at everything it represented. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Neither did I." Another pause, then, "What do you need?" Caleb's eyes lifted, focused. "Everything," he said. Silence on the other end. And then, "That kind of call usually means trouble." Caleb gave a small, humorless smile. "It does." He leaned forward slightly. "But it also means opportunity." Another pause. Longer this time. Then Daniel spoke again. "All right," he said. Start talking. Caleb looked down at Bruno. The dog met his gaze, steady, unwavering. Caleb nodded once. Then he began. Not with everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to open the door. Enough to shift the balance. Because this wasn't about hiding anymore. It wasn't about surviving. It was about choosing what came next. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb Turner knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just fighting back. He was building something. Something they couldn't erase. Something they couldn't bury. Something that would outlast all of it. And this time, he wasn't alone. The first week passed like a storm that never quite broke. Caleb moved between the small town and the ridge above the ranch, never staying in one place long enough to be predictable. Daniel Brooks worked fast, faster than Caleb expected. Papers were filed. Quiet calls were made. Names were cross-checked. Not everything was said out loud. It didn't need to be. Some truths spoke for themselves. By the second week, the vehicles stopped coming. The road up to the ranch went quiet again. Too quiet, maybe. But different. The kind of quiet that follows something ending, not something waiting. Caleb stood at the edge of the property one morning, looking out over the land. The same broken fence, the same leaning barn, the same house that had nearly swallowed him whole the first night. But it didn't feel the same anymore. Bruno stood beside him, his posture relaxed for the first time since they arrived. The tension in his body had eased, replaced by something steadier. Caleb reached down, resting a hand against his neck. "We're going back," he said. Bruno's tail moved once. That was enough. They walked the rest of the way together. The house stood still, unchanged on the outside, but inside something had shifted. Caleb pushed the door open. No resistance. No echo that felt wrong. Just wood. Just space. Just a house. He stepped in. Bruno followed. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. It didn't press in. It didn't watch. It simply existed. Caleb walked slowly through the living room, through the kitchen, stopping for a moment over the trapdoor. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he turned toward the window. Light poured in. Clean. Clear. The kind of light that made things visible instead of hiding them. Caleb exhaled. "We're not burying it again," he said quietly. That was the difference. Before, everything about this place had been built to hide. Now, he would make it visible. The work started small. A broken board on the porch replaced. A window cleared of years of dirt. Dust swept from the floors. Caleb worked with his hands, steady and methodical. The same discipline that had once been used for survival now turned toward something else. Rebuilding. Bruno stayed close through it all. Never far. Never distracted. But calmer. Watching without tension. As if he knew. This part was different. Days turned into weeks. The town noticed. At first it was just looks. As curious glances from across the street. Quiet conversations in the diner. Then, help. A man from the hardware store dropped off supplies without asking for payment. "Settle it later," he said. A woman from the diner brought food one evening, setting it on the porch without knocking. "Figured you might forget to eat," she called out as she walked away. Caleb didn't stop them. Didn't question it. He just nodded. Accepted it. That was new too. One afternoon, Daniel drove up the dirt road, stepping out of his car with a folder in hand. He looked around the property, taking in the changes. "You've been busy," he said. Caleb shrugged slightly. "Had to be." Daniel handed him the folder. "It's done," he said. Everything we could secure, it's yours, legally protected. Caleb flipped it open. Documents, trust structures, ownership, layers built to protect what had once been hidden. And the names? Caleb asked. Daniel met his eyes. They're being handled. That was all he said. Caleb nodded once. That was enough. They stood there in silence for a moment. Then Daniel glanced down at Bruno. He's the one who found it? He asked. Caleb looked at the dog. A faint smile touched his face. Yeah, he said. He is. Daniel nodded. Smart dog. Caleb's voice softened. More than that. Daniel didn't ask more. He didn't need to. When he left, the dust from his car settled slowly back onto the road. The ranch stood quiet again, but not empty. Never empty. Caleb turned toward the barn. It had been the last place he hadn't touched. The structure still leaned, its boards weathered and gray, its doors hanging unevenly. He walked toward it. Bruno followed. Inside, the space was wider than it looked from the outside. Light filtered through gaps in the wood, casting long beams across the floor. Caleb stood in the center, looking, thinking. This is where it starts, he said. Bruno's ears flicked. Caleb nodded. Not just for us. He turned slowly, taking in the space. For others. The idea had come quietly, not as a plan, not as a mission, just a thought that refused to leave. There were others like him, men who came back and couldn't find their place, who carried things they couldn't explain, who needed space, time, silence, and maybe something to rebuild. Caleb stepped outside again, looking across the land. There's room here, he said. Bruno stood beside him. Caleb reached down, scratching behind his ear. Oh, we make it count. The seasons began to shift. Grass pushed through the earth again. The barn straightened piece by piece. The house filled with light, and people started to come. Not many at first. One man, then another. Quiet, reserved, each carrying their own weight. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. They worked. They stayed. They began again. Bruno moved among them easily, calm, steady. He seemed to understand them, to recognize something in them that others couldn't see. Caleb watched it all unfold slowly, not forced, not rushed, just real. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the mountains, Caleb walked out to the far edge of the property. Bruno followed. They reached the oak tree near the river, the place where it had all begun. Caleb knelt down, saw her brushing away the dirt near the base. The metal edge of the hatch was still there, still hidden, still waiting. He looked at it for a long moment, then reached into his pocket. The key, not large, not ornate, just a simple piece of metal that had opened everything. He turned it over in his hand, then placed it into the ground, covered it, pressed the dirt down firmly. Bruno watched, silent. Caleb stood. That part's done, he said. Not forgotten, not erased. Just finished. He turned back toward the ranch. Lights glowed in the windows now. Warm. Alive. Voices carried faintly through the air. Laughter. Real laughter. Caleb exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long time. There was no weight in his chest, no echo in his head, no past pulling him backward. Just this. Just now. He looked down at Bruno. The dog met his gaze. Steady, unwavering. Caleb smiled faintly. You didn't just find something buried, he said quietly. He reached down, resting his hand against Bruno's neck. You brought me back. Bruno leaned into him. Just slightly, that was all. Caleb turned toward the ranch, toward the life that had grown from something broken. And as they walked back together, side by side, the land behind them no longer felt like a place that swallowed people. It felt like a place that gave them back. And for the first time, Caleb Turner wasn't just surviving. He was home. And maybe that's what this story was really about. Not the money, not the secrets, not even the danger, but finding your way back when everything else is gone. If this story meant something to you, drop a 1 in the comments. 1. Now, if you believe everyone deserves a second chance, drop a 0. And if you're watching this from somewhere out there, tell me where you're from. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might be even closer to your heart than this one. And trust me, you won't want to miss it.